You might not believe me when I say this, but what began with nothing more than a simple hug in the living room ended up changing the way I saw everything. It wasn't anything scandalous, no big secret or forbidden story. It was something far more rare, something honest, tender, and deeply human. Before I begin, let me ask you this. Where are you watching us from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. I always love seeing how far our little community stretches across the world. It happened on one of those Sundays when the world feels softer than usual. Outside, the rain had melted into a gentle mist, and inside the house there was a kind of quiet that almost felt alive, like the walls themselves were resting. I had just finished washing the last of the dishes from our late brunch. My son Daniel was sitting on the couch, flipping through the channels the way he often did when he wanted company, but didn't feel like talking. He'd been stopping by more often lately, checking in on me. I always told him he didn't need to, that I was fine on my own now that the house had grown so quiet. But truth be told, I think those visits were more for him than for me. I dried my hands on the dish towel and walked into the living room. The soft, amber glow of the lamp made everything look like a memory, even as it was happening. Hungry again, I asked, resting my hand on the chair. Daniel turned, gave me that crooked little smile he inherited from his father. No, Mom, I'm good. Just wanted to sit for a bit longer. I nodded and sat down beside him, smoothing my skirt. For a while, we didn't say a word. It wasn't awkward, it was full. Then, without thinking, I leaned in and wrapped my arms around him. Just a hug. Nothing more. At first, he didn't move. Then slowly, his arms came around me tighter than usual. That's when I noticed it, his breathing. Uneven, shallow, as if he was holding something in. I pulled back just slightly, ready for a joke or a playful comment. But instead, he just looked at me. Really looked. It was the kind of gaze I hadn't seen since he was a boy, sneaking into my bed after a nightmare. Only this time, it wasn't fear in his eyes. It was something heavier. A longing. A quiet ache. You okay? I asked softly. He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened, then he gave a small nod, but his eyes never left mine. Something shifted in that silence. There was no mother trying to fix, no son pretending to be strong. Just two people, one heart asking quietly to be seen, and another answering without words. Finally, he whispered, I miss feeling close to someone. The ache in my chest wasn't pain, it was recognition. I knew that emptiness well. I'd lived with it since his father passed, since the laughter in this house grew rare, since my own reflection felt like a stranger some mornings. I brushed a lock of hair from his forehead, a gesture I hadn't made in years. You're not alone, Daniel, I told him. He swallowed hard, eyes still fixed on me. That was the real moment. Not the hug, not even the words. It was that gaze, deep searching, as if he was asking, do you see me? Not just as your son, but as a man trying to piece himself back together. And I did, I saw him. We sat closer, the couch creaking under our weight. He let his head fall against my shoulder, and I held him the way I used to when he was little. But this time we weren't mother and child. We were equals, two souls, carrying loneliness, finding comfort in being understood. Outside, the mist had thickened into rain, steady and soothing. Inside, the faint scent of coffee lingered, and an old movie hummed in the background. In that living room, something inside me loosened a knot I'd carried for years. It wasn't just about motherhood or aging or grief. It was about what it means to truly see and be seen. And in that moment, both of us finally were. The soft glow from the television flickered across the living room walls, but neither of us was watching anymore. Daniel's head was still resting on my shoulder, his body more relaxed now, though his fingers fidgeted lightly at the hem of his sleeve, a quiet signal that his mind was still turning. I stayed still. Sometimes being a mother means knowing when silence says more than words. After a long pause, he shifted, sitting up slightly, though he didn't move far. His hand rested close to mine on the couch cushion, near enough for warmth, not quite touching. "I didn't mean to make that weird," he said softly, almost embarrassed. "It wasn't weird," I replied, gently glancing at him. "It was real." He looked at me, then his expression carrying both gratitude and uncertainty, as if he were testing how much he could share. Daniel had always been that way, careful, thoughtful, carrying more than he wanted anyone else to notice. "I don't talk to anyone like this, Mom," he admitted. He hesitated, then added quietly, "Not even to Emily. Not even when we were married." There it was, the truth, finally spilling out, fragile but undeniable. I reached out, laid my hand over his. It was a simple gesture, yet it felt like a bridge built on trust rather than duty. "You don't have to explain," I said, but he shook his head. "No, I want to. I need to." His voice cracked. His eyes grew red, blinking hard as he looked down at our hands. After the divorce, I thought I'd feel free, like I could breathe again. But all I felt was hollow. I'd sit in the car after work, staring at the driveway, not wanting to walk into an empty house. Silence. It's different when you don't choose it. I squeezed his hand gently. "I know." His gaze lifted to study my face, like he was seeing me in a way he hadn't before. "You do, don't you?" "Yes," I whispered. "After your father passed, I told myself the quiet was peace. But it wasn't. It was just absence." A heavy silence filled the room, different this time, weighted with all the truths we had carried alone for too long, now finally laid bare. Then softly, Daniel said, "I remember Dad used to hold you when he thought I wasn't looking. Just little moments in the kitchen, on the porch. You always looked so safe in his arms. I used to think I want that one day. Someone who makes me feel like home." His honesty caught me off guard, a knot tightening in my throat, not from sadness, but from the beauty of his vulnerability. "You will," I whispered. "But until then, you still have arms that know how to hold and be held. You still have people who care." He turned toward me, fully now, his gaze tender, searching. "Do you?" he asked. "Do you feel that? Like you have someone who really sees you?" His question pierced me. Not because it was bold, but because it was so rare. In all my years as a wife, a widow, a mother, how many people had truly asked me that? I drew a deep breath. Sometimes yes, But most days, no. Most days, I feel invisible. Like the world kept moving and I became part of the backdrop. People don't look at women my age the same way anymore. They don't ask how we feel. They just assume we're fine because we're still standing. Daniel's eyes softened, filled with something I hadn't seen in years. Reverence. "You're not invisible to me," he said. My breath caught. Not because I needed validation, but because being seen by someone you love is its own kind of grace. I smiled, brushed the side of his cheek with my fingers. "And you're not alone." We stayed like that. Our hands joined our hearts, no longer guarded. Then Daniel leaned in, not for a kiss, not for anything that crossed a line, but simply to rest his forehead against mine. A gesture carrying years of unspoken emotion, respect, gratitude, longing for connection in a world that rarely slows down enough for it. I closed my eyes, letting that closeness wrap around me like a shawl. My son, yes, but also a man who had weathered storms, who still dared to be vulnerable. We sat breathing in sync, letting the past settle, the present stretch wider. Eventually, I pulled back just slightly and smiled. "You want some tea?" For the first time that night, a real smile spread across his face. "Yeah, that sounds perfect." As I stood and walked toward the kitchen, I didn't feel old or invisible or lonely. I felt alive, seen, needed. Something had shifted between us, not a boundary crossed, but a wall, gently lowered. The kettle let out a soft whistle, its steam curling upward, as if it carried secrets of its own. I turned off the stove, poured hot water over 2 chamomile tea bags, and set the mugs onto a tray. My hands moved out of habit, but my thoughts were still back in the living room. When I returned, Daniel was right where I'd left him, sitting quietly, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together, like he was steadying himself. As soon as our eyes met, his expression softened. "Still take honey in yours?" I asked, with a small smile. "Always," he said, faintly returning it. I handed him the mug and sat beside him again, the warmth of the tea sinking into my palms, but the closeness between us warming something deeper. For a while we sipped in silence. Outside, the rain had slowed, tapping lightly against the roof, like a heartbeat. The whole house felt like it was holding its breath. Daniel finally spoke. "Do you ever wonder what life might have been like if things had gone differently?" I tilted my head. "Differently how?" He shrugged. "If Dad had lived longer, if Emily and I had worked out, if you and I had talked like this more often." I thought about it. I used to wonder, but eventually I realized life isn't just about what happens. It's about what we choose to do with what's left. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on his tea, then lifted them again. I don't think I realized how much I missed this. Just being here with you, feeling like I could breathe. I reached out, touched his forearm gently. A small gesture, but enough to remind him and myself that neither of us was drifting alone. "You've always had that," I said softly. "Even when you forgot." He studied me then more intently. "And you? Have you had someone you could just be with since Dad?" The question startled me, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I hesitated before admitting I've had moments, people, but nothing that stayed. Nothing that asked how I was at the end of the day. Mothers are expected to be strong. We don't often get the same softness in return. Daniel's brows drew together, his voice gentle. You deserve that softness, Mom. You deserve more than just being the strong one. I smiled, faintly touched, in a way I hadn't expected. That means more than you know. Almost unconsciously, he reached out and tucked a loose strand of my hair behind my ear, the same way I used to do for him when he was little. The tenderness in the gesture made my breath catch. I see you, he said, slow and deliberate. Not just as my mom, as you. Something in me shifted. I didn't feel exposed. I felt understood. And that's a rarer intimacy than anything else. I set my mug down, turned slightly toward him. It's hard to explain what that feels like. To be really seen. Daniel nodded, voice low, almost fragile. I think I'm only starting to understand it myself. He was 38 now, not a boy. But in his posture, in his eyes, I could still see the weight of a child's aches, something he had carried alone for years. What is it? I asked. He hesitated, then whispered. Sometimes I feel like I don't know how to be close to anyone anymore. Like I forgot. And it scares me. I reached up, resting my hand gently on his cheek. He didn't pull away. He leaned into it, eyes fluttering shut, as though the touch itself was permission. You didn't forget, I said softly. You just needed to remember. And I'm here. You're not alone. His hand came up, holding mine against his face, thumb brushing lightly across the back of my hand. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't desperate. It was human grounding. In that suspended moment, we weren't just mother and son. We were two people who had spent years putting others first, finally finding space to simply feel to be. He always made me feel safe, he said, opening his eyes again. But tonight, I feel something more. I feel known. The weight of those words struck something deep. I leaned in, pressing my forehead gently against his, just as he had earlier. We stayed there, eyes closed, hands joined, breathing in sync. And in that silence, I realized something. I wasn't invisible. Not to him. Not tonight. There are moments in life that escape definition, not about roles, labels, or what the world expects of us, but about connection, about truth, about the way two souls recognize each other, beyond time, beyond structure. When we finally leaned back, the clock on the wall ticked softly, reminding us that time was still moving, even if, for a little while, we had stepped outside of it. Daniel gave me a tired, genuine smile. I should probably get going, he said, or I offered gently. You could stay the night. The guest room's ready. He looked at me with a flicker of surprise, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I'd like that. I gathered the mugs while he stood, and something warm settled in my chest. Not just comfort, not just relief, hope. Because sometimes the smallest shift, a single conversation, a glance, a moment shared, can change everything. The house was still, not the hollow stillness of loneliness, but the tender hush that follows when your heart has been cracked open and somehow it doesn't hurt anymore. We walked down the hallway together, his footsteps soft on the old floorboards. For a moment, I was reminded of him as a child, padding quietly after me at night, after a bad dream, trying not to be heard, though I always knew. I opened the guest room door, switching on the lamp. Warm amber light filled the small space. "There's an extra blanket in the closet if you need it," I said, stepping aside. "Thanks, Mom," he murmured, eyes roaming the room like he was seeing it for the first time. He looked exhausted, not just from the day, but from carrying too much for too long. I lingered in the doorway, torn between leaving and staying. That's when he shifted, scratching the back of his neck, the way he always did when he was nervous. "Would you? Maybe sit with me for a little while, just until I fall asleep?" The question landed softly, but it weighed heavy with meaning. Of course, I nodded. He eased back against the pillows, while I pulled the old armchair closer. For a while, I simply sat there, watching his chest rise and fall more evenly now, his shoulders finally letting go of their burdens. "You know," he said, suddenly, eyes fixed on the ceiling, voice barely above a whisper, "I used to be afraid you'd get tired of me." I blinked. "What?" "When I was a teenager," he continued. "Angry all the time, slamming doors, saying things I didn't mean. I remember once I yelled at you and you just stood there in the hallway. You didn't say anything. You just stayed. I thought I'd pushed you too far, that one day you'd finally give up on me." I reached out, placing my hand on the blanket near his arm. "Never." His tired eyes met mine. "I know that now. But back then, it stayed with me. Even later, with Emily, with everyone, I kept waiting for people to leave." He gave me a faint, almost disbelieving smile. "But now, I'm starting to believe some people don't." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. He reached over, covering my hand with his. "I don't know what tonight was," he admitted, "but it mattered more than I can explain." I nodded, holding his gaze. "It mattered to me too, and it did. Not because it changed what we were, mother and son, but because it deepened it. It reminded me that connection doesn't always obey rules or titles. Sometimes it simply exists." "I feel safe with you," Daniel whispered. "Like I can breathe again." "You can," I said, my voice just as soft. The lamplight wrapped us in a golden glow, the rustling of the trees outside, adding its own quiet music. I thought of all the nights I'd sat alone, wishing for something I couldn't name. Maybe this was it all along. Not romance, not escape, just closeness, recognition, a shared breath. Eventually I stood. His hand lingered on mine for a heartbeat longer before letting go. "I'll let you sleep," I said. At the doorway, his voice called me back. "Mom." I turned. "Thank you for everything, for tonight." I smiled. "Good night, Daniel." Back in my own room, I lay down, staring out the window at the quiet night sky. My heart was full, but not heavy. There was no confusion, no ache, only peace. Some moments don't need to be defined. Some bonds don't need to be boxed in. Sometimes being truly seen, being held emotionally, wholly without expectation, is the most powerful experience of all. And that night I didn't feel alone. Neither did he. And that more than anything was enough.